when a power-tripping HOA president demands entry into my home, and my daughter dares to say no, a single gunshot shatters our quiet life forever. What she didn't know, what no one knew, is that I'm a district attorney with a deadly sense of justice and a secret past of my own. If you love justice, served ice-cold and passion hotter than hell, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more explosive stories like this. Camila Torres had always believed that silence was sacred. That belief had been shattered too many times in her courtroom, in her marriage, and now, even in her supposed sanctuary, a manicured suburb 20 miles outside the city, where the hedges were symmetrical and the neighbors smiled just a little too tightly. After her divorce, she bought the house in Glenwood Oaks, thinking it would offer her and her daughter some semblance of peace. It was a clean break, away from the city and the shadow of a husband who had spent more time in other women's apartments than in his own home. Camila didn't need to reinvent herself. She just needed the world to stop spinning long enough for her to catch her breath. At first, the neighborhood felt like a tranquil step up from the noise and tension of her former life. The sun streamed through generous windows in the morning. The lawns were always trimmed by invisible hands, and joggers passed by the front of her house at the same time every morning with robotic consistency. It was eerie, yes, but also oddly comforting. Predictability was a luxury in her line of work. Camila was used to last-minute subpoenas, corrupt witnesses, and hardened criminals who thought they could stare her down across the courtroom floor. Here, at least, she thought she could lower her shoulders, just a little. Her daughter, Isla, had a different reaction to the move. At 17, Isla wore defiance like an accessorily loud or reckless, but cool and unyielding. She had Camila's dark eyes and her father's silent smirk, the kind that could feel like a taunt even when she wasn't trying to provoke anyone. She'd been uprooted during her junior year, forced to leave behind her friends and an art teacher she'd actually liked, and was now stuck in what she referred to as a Stepford dystopia. Camila let her vent, understanding the layers of pain behind her daughter's attitude. Isla had witnessed the shouting matches. She'd found the lipstick stain on a tie that didn't belong to her mother. She'd held it together when Camila had fallen apart. Now she had a right to some anger. They were managing. Not thriving, not particularly happy, but they were managing. Until Karen Whitmore introduced herself. Karen wasn't the kind of woman who knocked. She pressed doorbells like she expected tribute. The first time Camila saw her, Karen was framed in a wide sun hat, with sunglasses perched on top of her blonde helmet of hair. She looked like a tennis club mannequin who'd been left out in the heat too long. Camila had answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair up in a messy bun from a Saturday spent unpacking boxes. Karen hadn't even pretended to smile. "You'll want to pull your trash bins in before noon on Saturdays," she said, holding a clipboard without offering her name. "It's in the bylaws." Camila blinked. "Hello to you too." Karen didn't react. "We've had complaints already about unsightly waste management issues on this block. I'm sure you understand." "I'm sure I don't." Karen offered a tight-lipped smirk and handed her a printed copy of the neighborhood rules before turning and walking back down the driveway without another word. Camila stood there for a full minute, trying to decide whether to laugh or scream. She settled on a muttered curse and went back inside. The incidents didn't stop. Karen returned once a week with new infractions. Leaves weren't cleared fast enough after a storm. The mailbox's paint had a chip. There was a small crack in the corner of the driveway that, according to Karen, could reflect poorly on resale values. It was absurd. Camila started documenting everything, taking pictures with timestamps and printing out the actual HOA bylaws to compare them to Karen's claims. The woman wasn't just aggressive, she was either lying or rewriting the rules as she went. Isla had no patience for her. One Friday afternoon, Camila came home to find Isla pacing the living room, fists clenched. Karen had come to the door again while Camila was at work, demanding access to inspect a tree that hung slightly over the fence line into a shared green space. When Isla told her to come back another time, Karen allegedly said she had the legal right to enter the property. She said she'd fine us $500 and report us to the board. Isla fumed. Then she tried to open the gate like she owned the damn place. "What did you do?" Camila asked, trying to keep her voice even. "I locked it and told her if she stepped onto the property again without permission, I'd call the cops." Camila stared at her daughter, chest tight. A part of her felt pride. Isla had been assertive and protective, but another part, the deeply trained part, understood the risk of challenging people who thought they were untouchable. "She scares you," Isla said, quieter now. "You don't say it, but she does." Camila didn't deny it. There was something about Karen's eyes, a calculation behind her smiles, a sense of impunity that came from too many years of being allowed to act without consequences. People like Karen weren't used to being challenged. They were used to being obeyed. It didn't help that Karen sat on the HOA board, chaired the Community Safety Committee, and had the ear of more than one local official. She wasn't a public figure, not in any formal sense, but in Glenwood Oaks she didn't have to be. She was power with a garden hose and a pearl necklace. Camila decided she needed to be more careful, but she also knew she couldn't let this continue. She started logging every interaction, recording conversations when legally permissible, and noting the times Karen walked by their house. She felt the familiar itch of building a case. Except this time, it wasn't for the people she prosecuted. This time, it was personal. One morning, while leaving for work, Camila noticed a small sticker on her car windshield. It was shaped like a parking violation, but wasn't issued by the city. Printed in all caps were the words, "This vehicle is not approved for street overnight parking. Final warning." It hadn't been there the night before. The next day, a different note appeared, this time on their front door. "You are in violation of Ho community decorum regarding porch clutter. Immediate compliance is expected." There was no clutter. Camila had checked. Karen was testing them, probing for weakness, and Camila knew people like her didn't stop unless they were made to. But she hadn't realized yet just how far Karen was willing to go. Not yet. Not until the day her daughter didn't open the door, and Karen brought more than a clipboard. Camila had always trusted Isla's instincts. Her daughter didn't exaggerate or seek drama the way some teenagers did. When Isla said someone crossed a line, it usually meant the line had been obliterated. So when Camila returned home that Wednesday afternoon to find Isla visibly rattled, her cheeks flushed and her arms crossed tight across her chest, she knew something had shifted. Karen hadn't just annoyed her. She had frightened her. "She tried to come inside," Isla said, her voice steady but low. "She said there was a gas leak, that she had a work order." Camila had barely set down her briefcase. The kitchen smelled faintly of chamomile from a tea Isla must have brewed, untouched and cooling on the table beside her sketchpad. Lines of graphite etched the page in sudden, frantic strokes, a half-formed image of a woman's face half obscured by shadow. "What did she say exactly?" Camila asked. "She said she was with the HOA, and they'd received a report about a gas leak coming from our side of the fence. She said she needed to get in immediately to inspect it before it became dangerous. But she wasn't wearing any kind of badge. No technician vest, nothing. Just her usual fake smile and a clipboard." Camila pulled her hair out of its ponytail and rubbed the back of her neck, trying to will away the cold rush of anxiety crawling along her spine. Isla watched her with a kind of distant calm, the kind that came after a jolt of fear had already moved through your body and left you empty. "I told her she couldn't come in," Isla continued. "I said we'd call the gas company ourselves if we needed to. She got mad, like twitchy eye mad. Then she tried the door handle. I had already locked it. She just stood there for a while after that, not saying anything, like she was waiting." Camila pressed her palms flat on the countertop, grounding herself. "Did she leave after that?" "Eventually. But she was muttering under her breath. I think she called me a brat. I didn't catch all of it." Camila opened the security app on her phone. Their doorbell camera had been recording all week, but when she pulled up the footage, the app blinked and buffered. The video from earlier that afternoon had corrupted timestamps. The feed skipped and jumped, as if someone had tampered with it. Her heart began to beat harder. Isla noticed. "Don't freak out. I'm okay." Camila didn't answer right away. She was already thinking about worst-case scenarios, her legal brain ticking through possibilities. Karen hadn't made an honest mistake. There had been no work order. No calls to the gas company had been logged from the HOA's emergency line. Camila checked everything. She even called the gas company herself and confirmed there hadn't been any reported leaks within 3 blocks. Karen had lied. Not just once, but deliberately and convincingly. She had used the idea of danger as a pretext to gain access to their home. That night, Camila triple-checked the locks. She barely slept, and when she did, her dreams were jagged and frantic, filled with knocking and smoke and Isla's voice calling her name. The next day unfolded in slow motion. Camila was in court, arguing a motion to exclude a confession obtained under suspicious circumstances, but her mind kept flickering back to Isla. She texted her every hour, asking if everything was all right. Isla responded each time with short, reassuring updates. Studying, napping, making lunch, all clear. Camila stayed later than usual, meeting with a junior prosecutor about a high-profile gang case they were prepping for trial. She meant to be home by 6. She wasn't watching the time when she received the call. It came from their neighbor 2 doors down, a retired postal worker named Mr. Delaney. His voice was strained and panicked. "There's been an incident at your house," he said. "The police are here. Paramedics too. Your daughter's been hurt." Camila didn't ask how. She didn't waste time with questions. She was in her car before the call ended, weaving through rush-hour traffic like every second cost blood. Her mind leapt to the unthinkable and then beyond it, to what came after grief, to vengeance and silence and fire. She turned down the final street to find the cul-de-sac crawling with red and blue lights. She saw Isla's sketchbook on the front lawn before she saw Isla herself. A paramedic was kneeling beside a stretcher, securing straps over her chest as another adjusted an oxygen mask over her face. Her shirt was bloodied on the left side, the crimson soaked deep into the fabric and spreading in a pattern Camila would never forget. Isla's eyes were closed, her face pale and still. Camila sprinted to her, only to be stopped by a uniformed officer who didn't recognize her. "I'm her mother," she said, louder than she meant to. "I'm Camila Torres. That's my daughter." The paramedic glanced over and nodded. "She's stable, ma'am. Entry wound is through the shoulder. We're prepping her for transport to St. Martin's. You can ride with us." Karen was standing on the front porch, wrapped in a navy blue cardigan, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Her eyes were wide and glassy. Camila stared at her and saw no remorse, only calculation. "She attacked me," Karen said, before Camila could even open her mouth. "I came to deliver a notice, and she flew at me. I feared for my safety." Camila didn't respond. Her mind was laser-focused on Isla, who had begun to stir, her eyes fluttering open with a faint groan. She wasn't dying. Thank God she wasn't dying. But the rage that coiled in Camila's chest wasn't dulled by relief. It sharpened into something colder, something ancient and final. She followed the ambulance, sat beside Isla, while the EMT monitored her vitals, held her daughter's hand when she drifted in and out of sleep. Isla's voice, when it finally came, was slurred but clear enough to cut through the noise. "She had a gun, Mom," she whispered. "I didn't open the door. She told me I'd regret it." Camila couldn't breathe. The next 24 hours passed in a haze of hospital paperwork, police interviews, and administrative stalling. Karen had filed a report within the hour, alleging that Isla had threatened her with a kitchen knife when she refused entry. No weapon had been found. The door hadn't been opened. The bullet had gone straight through the wood. Yet the responding officers hesitated. Karen had influence. She'd already spoken to someone on the board of supervisors. A detective mentioned that charges would take time, that the situation needed further investigation. Camila knew what that meant. They were giving Karen the benefit of the doubt. They were treating this as a complicated misunderstanding, not an attempted homicide. They didn't know who Camila was. Not really. She sat beside Isla's hospital bed that night, watching the steady beep of the heart monitor, and made a silent promise. She would not scream. She would not beg. She would not let grief dull her edge. Karen Whitmore had made a fatal mistake. She had picked the wrong daughter to shoot, and the wrong mother to lie to. The early hours of the morning felt like a war zone wrapped in sterile white. Camila hadn't moved from her chair next to Isla's hospital bed. Her legs were stiff and numb, but she didn't care. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor anchored her to reality, but nothing about the past 24 hours made sense in a rational world. Every few minutes Isla stirred slightly, sometimes murmuring incoherently, sometimes wincing in pain, but she hadn't spoken again. Camila had memorized the slow rise and fall of her chest, the subtle flutter of her eyelids, the faint curve of her fingers on the edge of the blanket. Everything else outside the hospital room felt fake, muted, or dangerous. She replayed the events again and again in her mind, searching for missed signs, for any clue that Karen had been capable of this. But there had been no warning, No rational lead-up. Karen had shown up with a gun and pulled the trigger through a closed door. Camila wanted to believe it had been impulsive, a moment of unhinged rage, but there was something too practiced about it. Something disturbingly intentional. By 6 a.m., a detective came by for her official statement. He looked young, his tie was crooked and his eyes were ringed with fatigue, but he seemed decent enough. His name was Mendez, and he opened a small notebook and sat across from her like he was trying not to intrude. "I understand this is difficult," he said, voice careful, "but we need to get your account of the events before the timeline gets too far away." Camila straightened her back. "You have Karen's statement, don't you?" "We do." She lied. He nodded, as if he had expected her to say it. "She claims your daughter opened the door with a kitchen knife in hand, and that she discharged her firearm in self-defense. There was no knife. Isla never opened the door. The paramedics had to break it open to get to her. Isla's injuries are consistent with a single gunshot wound to the shoulder, through the door. So then it wasn't self-defense. We're still working on collecting all available evidence." Camila's jaw tightened. "You're not arresting her." Mendez hesitated. "We're reviewing the matter thoroughly. The firearm was registered, but preliminary examination suggests she discharged it from the porch. There's no clear sign of forced entry or struggle inside the home. We have to proceed carefully. She brought a gun to my house and shot my daughter for not letting her in. You're telling me you need time to process what that means?" He didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he jotted down something in his notebook and offered a non-committal murmur before leaving her alone again. Camila knew the subtext. Karen had called her contacts before the report even hit the central office. Her story would be tidy, her record spotless. The HOA would back her version of events to protect its own image. And most damning of all, there were no reliable video recordings left. The camera footage had been compromised. The only witness who could contradict Karen's version was Isla, and she was sedated. It was a tight knot of lies and procedural caution, and Camila could already see it beginning to constrict. She knew the system too well. She had built her career threading needles through tangled legal grey zones, and she had seen too many cases unravel because those in power didn't want the burden of conflict. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor anymore. She had crossed a line into something far more dangerous, and the community didn't know how to deal with that truth. Or maybe they didn't want to. The hospital room felt smaller the longer Camila sat in it. The scent of antiseptic clung to her clothes. Nurses drifted in and out, with quiet updates. Isla would be discharged within 48 hours if her vitals remained stable. The bullet had passed clean through, missing any arteries. A miracle, one nurse had called it. Camila didn't believe in miracles. Not anymore. She stepped out of the room just before noon and walked to the hospital parking lot to get fresh air. Her phone vibrated with a message from her office. A colleague was checking in. Another was asking if she'd be back for the sentencing hearing on Friday. A third offered her flowers. She ignored them all and called someone she hadn't spoken to in months. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Navarro." "Elijah." "It's Camila." A pause, sharp as a blade. Then a breath. "It's been a while. I need your help." He didn't ask why. He didn't say anything for nearly 10 seconds, and then she heard the soft rustle of keys and movement on the other end. "Where are you?" "St. Martin's, room 419. I'll be there in 15. She ended the call without another word and walked back to Isla's room. She didn't know exactly why she had called Eli. Maybe it was because he was the only person who had ever seen her with her defenses down and hadn't run. Or maybe it was because he had once told her that he hated crooked politics even more than she did. Whatever the reason, it felt like the right call. When he arrived, she recognized him instantly. Older, maybe a little more hardened, but unmistakable. He wore his badge on a lanyard now instead of clipped to his belt. His brown hair had more grey in it, and the lines around his eyes were deeper, but the steadiness in his gaze was the same. He looked at her and didn't ask about Isla, didn't ask about Karen. Just stepped in and let the silence close around them like an old coat. They stood near the window, side by side, looking out at the parking lot. "She shot Isla through the door," Camila said quietly, "and they're not arresting her." Eli didn't blink. "They want to make it go away." She claimed self-defense, that Isla came at her with a knife. It's complete fiction. "Do you have any usable surveillance?" No. The doorbell cam's been tampered with. The data's corrupted. She planned it then. Camila nodded. I think she knew exactly what she was doing, and she's covered just enough of her tracks to make the precinct hesitate. Eli rubbed his chin, thinking, I've heard about Whitmore. She's got friends in all the wrong places. Keeps dirt on half the board, maybe more. You've heard of her? She came up once in a community dispute I looked into last year. Nothing stuck. The woman's a spider. Camila turned toward him. Then help me burn down the web. Eli didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. I'm off duty until Monday. Consider me yours until then. The tension in her chest loosened, just slightly. For the first time since the shooting, she felt like she had an ally who didn't answer to chain-of-command politics or inter-department whispers. Eli would help her get the truth, but more importantly, he would believe her without needing to see the sanitized version. That mattered more than she'd realized. Isla stirred in her bed and opened her eyes fully this time, her voice faint but clear. Is that Detective Navarro? Eli approached, his face softening as he knelt beside her. Hey, kid. Been a while. Isla blinked slowly. She meant to do it. Camila walked over and brushed Isla's hair back from her forehead. We know. Isla's eyes were glassy but focused. She said, I warned you, right before I heard the bang. Camila took her daughter's hand and held it to her chest. Eli stood. Then we don't wait for the department to catch up. We start now. And with that, the war began. Camila didn't go back to the DA's office right away. She knew if she walked through those glass doors too soon, she would be expected to keep wearing the polished face of a public servant who trusted the process, who respected the chain of evidence and procedure, who would wait for justice to sort itself out in time. But she had seen the way the system bent when pressure came from the wrong angle. She had watched it more than once, in closed-door meetings and whispered hallway conversations, in the way certain names were handled delicately on case rosters, in the way evidence went missing before it was even entered into the record. Now her daughter had nearly been killed, and that same slow suffocation of truth was beginning to wrap itself around her family. She couldn't let it. She wouldn't. Back at the house, the door still bore a jagged hole at shoulder height, the wood splintered and bruised like a wound. It was all Camila could do to walk past it without pausing. Isla was upstairs resting, her arm in a sling, her eyes shadowed with something far deeper than painkillers could reach. She hadn't spoken much since returning from the hospital, not because she couldn't, because she didn't want to revisit the sound of the gunshot or the sudden sting that had knocked her back onto the floor. Camila sat at the dining table with Eli. Between them was her laptop, a battered notebook, and 3 cell phones. 2 were hers. The third had come from Eli's contact at a phone store downtown who owed him a favor. It wasn't exactly legal, but it was clean enough to keep off most radars. Eli told her not to use her regular phone for what came next. We start with what we can prove, he said, scrolling through a digital file he had pulled up from a locked database. Karen Whitmore doesn't have a criminal record. No complaints, no citations. Not even a speeding ticket. Camila raised an eyebrow. That's not clean. That's sanitized. Exactly. Either she's never slipped once, or someone's been keeping her slate polished. She has connections. OA board members with city council ties. I looked up campaign contributions last year. She donated $5,000 to 3 different district judges running for re-election. Any of them presiding over your county? 1. The same one who assigned the preliminary review to internal affairs instead of pushing for charges. Eli exhaled through his nose and sat back. She's playing politics, and she's good at it. Camila had already pulled up property records for Karen's home. The mortgage had been refinanced twice in the past 5 years, both times under the name of a trust that linked back to a shell company in Florida. That wasn't illegal, but it was unusual for someone living on a civil servant's pension. According to the HOA newsletter, Karen hadn't worked full-time in over a decade. She's hiding something, Camila said. Maybe a lot of things, and we need to find out what. Eli nodded. We need someone who lives close to her, someone who sees things. Camila thought for a moment. There's a woman 3 houses down. Older, lives alone. Name's Mrs. Alden. She's always watching through her blinds. Does she like Karen? I don't think she likes anyone, but I brought her a pie when we moved in, and she didn't slam the door on me. Might be enough. Later that day, they paid a visit to Mrs. Alden. Her house was dim and smelled like lavender and lemon oil. She listened without interrupting while Camila explained what had happened to Isla, though her expression didn't change much. Her eyes were sharp, her mouth a flat line. When Camila finished, she simply nodded and turned toward her front window. I told my husband 30 years ago when we moved here that the HOA would become a den of snakes. He said I was exaggerating, but you give one woman power over paint colors and lawn heights, and it all starts to rot. Have you seen anything unusual at Karen's house? Eli asked. Mrs. Alden tilted her head. Depends on what you call unusual. I've seen deliveries that come in unmarked vans, packages brought inside by men who don't wear uniforms, seen her meeting people late at night. Sometimes out on her back patio, sometimes by the old tool shed. Any photos? Camila asked. I don't own a smartphone, but I have eyes, and I remember what I see. She described one man in particular, middle-aged, always in dark clothing, with a limp on his right side. He came by every other Thursday and never stayed longer than 10 minutes. She said she'd seen Karen give him envelopes. Camila jotted everything down. Eli asked her to call him if she saw the man again. She agreed with a grunt and a wave of her hand. Back at Camila's house, Eli brewed coffee while she started assembling a digital case file. She knew the process instinctively, even if this time it wasn't official. Notes went into folders. Timelines were plotted. Statements were transcribed. She created backup drives and uploaded copies to a secure cloud server she kept separate from her work accounts. By the time the sun started to set, they had a rough blueprint. Karen had money flowing through a trust that masked its source, connections to at least one judge, and regular visits from someone who appeared to be delivering more than Amazon packages. Combined with her aggression, her efforts to tamper with video evidence, and now a clear motive to cover up something inside the neighborhood, it pointed to a larger pattern. Camila leaned against the counter, staring at the floor. Eli stood beside her, coffee mug in hand. I keep asking myself, she said quietly, what made her snap? What made her come to my house that day? Not just to scare us, but ready to shoot. She thought she was untouchable, Eli replied. She still does. I've seen people like her, but not this bold. Not unless they're desperate. She made a mistake. That's what happens when powerful people get sloppy. They act out of habit and forget there's a line. Camila turned toward him. His face was close, closer than she expected, and for a second she felt the pull of something old and unfinished between them. She didn't step away, and neither did he. Thanks for coming, she said. I didn't know who else to call. Eli's voice dropped. You always knew. You just didn't want to. Their eyes met. She could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing in between them. The case they had worked together 4 years earlier had ended with both of them gutted. A police chief had gone down for racketeering, but not before Eli was forced to lie on the stand to protect Camila from being named as the source of a leak. It had ended whatever they had started between them, without apology or closure. But now, with Isla upstairs recovering and danger still pulsing just outside the door, Camila didn't want to chase ghosts. She just wanted the truth, and someone to fight beside her. I'm going to destroy her, she said, not as a threat, but as a fact. Eli's response was immediate. Then let's start tomorrow. But she didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in bed, the hum of the ceiling fan above her, eyes open to the dark. Across the hall, Isla dreamed in fits, her pain softened only slightly by medication. Outside, in the stillness of the street, a car drove by with its headlights off. Camila listened until the sound disappeared. Then she reached for the notebook on her nightstand and made a list. Names, dates, questions. At the bottom, she wrote a single word in heavy ink. War. The following morning began with a knock on the door. Camila flinched at the sound, heart spiking before logic caught up with reflex. Isla was asleep upstairs, her breathing soft and even. Eli moved past her, checking the peephole, then unfastened the deadbolt. On the porch stood a courier in a brown uniform holding a plain envelope. For Miss Torres, he said, handing it over without ceremony. Camila took it and watched the man walk briskly back to his van. She closed the door and opened the envelope on the kitchen table, Eli at her side. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper with an embossed header, Glenwood Oaks Homeowners Association. No return address, no formal signature, just a typed message. You are in continued violation of Section 4 of the Community Bylaws. Failure to comply will result in administrative enforcement, fines, and legal consequences. This is your final notice. Camila read it twice. There was no mention of what the violation actually was. No explanation, no timestamp. It was a threat disguised as bureaucracy. She's trying to provoke you, Eli said. She wants you to overreact. I know. Camila folded the letter in half and placed it beside the others. But this one's different. She's escalating. The pressure was increasing from all sides. That same morning, Camila's superior at the district attorney's office left her a voicemail. It was friendly on the surface, expressing concern for Isla and offering her additional time off if needed. But near the end, the tone shifted. There's talk about potential conflicts of interest, Camila. Some on the board think it might be best if you recused yourself from any cases involving the HOA or its members, at least until the situation settles. Camila listened to the message 3 times before deleting it. It was the first clear sign that the walls were beginning to close in. Karen's reach extended far beyond the neighborhood. She had allies in city administration, and those allies were now exerting subtle pressure to keep Camila quiet. Later that day, Camila drove to the county records office. It was a beige, windowless building that smelled like damp paper and coffee grounds. Eli stayed behind with Isla, whose shoulder was healing but whose mood had become withdrawn. Camila didn't push her to talk. Not yet. She would, but not while the pain was still raw and the world still felt unsafe. At the records office, Camila requested archived copies of Glenwood Oaks HOA meeting minutes from the past 5 years. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but after a brief exchange and a display of Camila's credentials, she disappeared into a back room and returned with a large cardboard box. Camila spent the next 3 hours at a long metal table under flickering fluorescent lights. The minutes were typed, but often annotated in pen, usually in the same slanted handwriting. Karen's. Names were underlined. Notes in the margins included phone numbers and strange abbreviations Camila didn't immediately recognize. The deeper she went, the more concerned she became. There were discrepancies in voting records, motions that had passed without quorum, approvals for financial disbursements to vendors who didn't exist. At least 2 companies listed on landscaping invoices weren't registered with the state. Karen had been funneling money somewhere, possibly to herself, possibly to others. Camila began photographing every questionable document. She would need to follow up, run corporate searches, dig through tax filings. It was the kind of slow, deliberate work that could dismantle a person piece by piece, if done right. She returned home in the early evening and found Eli in the living room, sitting with Isla. They were watching an old film on mute while Isla sketched absently in a notebook. Camila's chest ached at the sight. Her daughter had lost some of her edge, like her outlines had been rubbed with an eraser. There was still strength in her eyes, but the fire had dimmed. After dinner, when Isla was upstairs again, Eli joined Camila in the dining room. She spread out the photos and notes from the records office. He examined them one by one. She's been moving money, Camila said, through fake vendors. At least 2 of the board members signed off on the expenses. You think they know? Maybe. Or maybe she's using their signatures without consent. I need more. Eli leaned back in his chair. What's your plan? I'm going to subpoena the HOA's financial records, off the books, through a contact in the auditor's office. They owe me. And when Karen finds out? She already knows I'm digging. I might as well keep going. Eli nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. There's something else. Camila turned to him, wary. Your name came up on a list, he said. An internal bulletin circulated between departments. Informal, but significant. They're flagging you as a liability. For what? For pursuing a conflict of interest. For not disclosing your personal involvement with the victim. She's my daughter. They're calling it a personal vendetta. They're worried you're going to go rogue. Camila laughed once, bitterly. Too late. You should know, Eli said gently. If this goes public, they'll distance themselves from you. You'll be on your own. I've always been on my own. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy. Camila reached for the nearest document and started highlighting names. Eli rose and walked to the kitchen, pouring water into 2 glasses. He handed her one. and she took it without looking up. Later that night, as the neighborhood grew still, and only the sound of crickets drifted through the open window, Camila sat on her bed and stared at her phone. The list of contacts was short. She had built a career on keeping people at a distance, protecting herself by keeping her circle tight. Now, the only person she truly trusted sat on her downstairs couch, guarding her daughter while she worked. She found herself thinking about the last time she and Eli had been alone together, 4 years earlier in a motel room on the edge of the city. They had just wrapped the deposition of a hostile witness. It was raining. They had shared a bottle of wine and a silence that buzzed with possibility. Nothing had happened, but everything almost had. The line between them had been drawn then, sharp and necessary. Now, that line felt faded. Camila got up and walked downstairs. Eli was sitting on the floor, flipping through a case file. His eyes rose when he saw her. "I can't sleep," she said. "Neither can I." She sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. After a moment, he reached over and brushed her hair back. Slow and deliberate, she closed her eyes. She didn't kiss him. Not yet, but she didn't move away either. They sat together in the quiet, two people surrounded by danger and doubt, finding in each other the smallest breath of calm before the storm arrived. And Camila knew the storm was coming. She could feel it in her bones. But tonight, she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The courthouse smelled like varnished wood and recirculated air. It was familiar, but not comforting. Camila had walked through its hallways for years, but now, as she stepped onto the polished tile floor with Isla's testimony weighing in her bag and Karen's trial about to begin, it felt like enemy territory. She passed colleagues who nodded but didn't stop to talk. Some looked at her with sympathy. Others looked away. Everyone had heard. The DA, whose daughter was shot by a neighborhood HOA president, now sitting second chair on her own case after being told to recuse herself from prosecutorial authority. Officially, she was only a liaison, a legal advisor to the assigned prosecutor. Unofficially, she was running the whole damn thing. No one had tried to stop her. Karen arrived at the same time, walking through the east entrance with 2 attorneys flanking her like bodyguards. She wore a cream-colored dress, her hair set in perfect curls, her lips a calm shade of pink. She waved at a news crew with a carefully measured smile. The cameras didn't flash until she reached the courthouse steps, and when they did, she turned her face just slightly to catch the light. Camila stood still and watched. The moment wasn't theatrical. It was rehearsed. Karen had always understood appearances. Now she was using them to mask a crime. The courtroom was already half full when Camila entered. Isla wasn't there. She would arrive later under escort, her testimony scheduled for the following afternoon. For now, Camila reviewed notes while the lead prosecutor, a tall, clean-cut man named Prentice, whispered last-minute strategy beside her. He was competent, but cautious. Camila knew he wouldn't push too hard. He was already concerned about optics. Karen had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no provable motive beyond the bare facts. Without Isla's first-hand account, most of what they had was circumstantial. The opening statements began without delay. Karen's lead counsel, a woman named Abigail Monroe, leaned into the idea of confusion. She painted the event as a tragic misunderstanding, a moment where fear overtook reason. She said Karen had acted in self-defense based on what she believed to be a clear and immediate threat. Her voice was soft, maternal. She used words like unfortunate and regrettable. She referred to Isla as the young woman instead of by name. She never once looked at Camila. When it was Prentice's turn, he stuck to the facts. Isla had not opened the door. The bullet had entered at an angle consistent with standing distance. No weapon had been recovered in the house, let alone near the entrance. Karen had brought a gun with her to deliver a non-urgent HOA notice. There had been no call to emergency services before or after the shot. Everything, Camila thought, was factual, and too clean, too passive. The jury looked engaged, but not moved. During recess, Camila stepped into the hallway and leaned against the cool wall, letting her eyes close for a moment. She didn't hear footsteps until Eli was beside her, his presence steady and quiet. "She's playing the victim well," he said. "She's always known how to. Jury's not buying it yet. They don't have to buy it. Just believe it's possible. Eli glanced around. You ready for Isla's testimony tomorrow? Camila nodded, but there was tightness in her chest. She says she is. I told her she didn't have to. She's stronger than most people I've met. Camila looked at him then. She's terrified. I would be too. Back in the courtroom, the first witness took the stand. It was Mr. Delaney, their neighbor, who had called the police that day. His voice was steady, but Camila could tell he was nervous. He recounted what he saw through his front window. Karen standing on the porch, her voice raised, then the sudden sound of the gunshot. He had not seen Isla at all. Just Karen, holding something at her side, then walking backward down the steps before turning away. On cross, Monroe was careful. She thanked him for his service to the neighborhood, then gently pressed on what he couldn't be sure of. Had he seen Isla? No. Did he know if the door was open or closed? No. Could he see the object in Karen's hand clearly? Not at that angle. Each no softened his impact. Camila clenched her pen until her fingers went white. The afternoon continued with a forensic technician explaining the bullet trajectory. She confirmed what the DA's team had asserted. The shot came from the porch and entered the door at a downward angle. But she couldn't say with certainty whether the shooter felt threatened. The law didn't concern itself with outcomes, only intent. That night, Camila barely touched her dinner. Isla picked at hers, pushing food around her plate without looking up. Eli joined them but didn't talk much. The house felt brittle, like a breath might break it. I don't know what to say tomorrow, Isla finally whispered, her fork still. You don't have to say anything perfect, Camila said. Just tell the truth, that's more than enough. What if they don't believe me? Camila's voice was soft. Then they don't. But that won't change what happened. And it won't change what I'll do next. Isla looked up then, her eyes tired but clear. Camila nodded, until there's nothing left to uncover. The following day, Isla entered the courtroom wearing a dark green blouse that made her look older, more composed. Her sling had been adjusted to sit lower on her arm. She took slow steps, but walked with her head up. Camila sat behind her, not at the prosecutor's table today, but close enough to catch her daughter's eye. When Isla took the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. She swore in with a voice that wavered only once, then settled. Prentice guided her gently. Isla described the afternoon in clear, simple terms. She recounted how Karen had knocked, demanded entry, claimed there was a gas leak. She described locking the door, saying no, and then hearing Karen's voice change, lower and more threatening. She said I'd regret it, Isla said. She sounded angry, like she was barely holding it in. Prentice let the words sit. Then he asked the crucial question. Did you ever open the door? No. Did you ever hold a weapon? No. Did you threaten her? No, I was scared. Camila watched the jurors as Isla spoke. Several leaned forward. One, an older woman near the back, looked like she might cry. Monroe did not object. Not once. But when Cross came, she stood slowly, walked to the podium, and changed her tone. She didn't question Isla's pain. She questioned Isla's memory. You were alone, weren't you? Yes. You were frightened. Yes. Is it possible your memory of the event has been colored by fear? Isla blinked. I remember exactly what happened. But fear changes things, doesn't it? It can make time stretch. It can distort noise. Can make someone seem more threatening than they actually were. I know what I heard, Isla said. Her voice didn't rise, but it gained weight. Monroe nodded, then returned to her table. She didn't push harder. She didn't need to. She had planted a seed. When Isla stepped down, Camila rose and walked her out. They said nothing until they reached the hallway, where Isla exhaled and leaned against her mother's shoulder. You did perfect, Camila whispered. Isla didn't reply. She just closed her eyes. Back inside, the courtroom moved on. But Camila had made a decision. The trial would continue, but she no longer cared if the system wanted her quiet. She would not be quiet. She would not let Karen hide behind procedure. If the jury wavered, then Camila would show them every rotten truth beneath Glenwood Oaks, whether they were ready for it or not. And if the law flinched, she would not. The second week of the trial began with fog hanging low over Glenwood Oaks. The mist curled along the edges of the sidewalks and draped over the neatly trimmed hedges like a quiet warning. Camila left the house before the sun had fully risen, her heels clicking against the pavement as she walked to her car. Eli was already waiting in the driveway, leaning against his truck with a thermos in hand. He didn't speak as she approached, only handed her the drink. It was hot, black, and bitter, just the way she liked it. Inside the courthouse, something had shifted. The air felt tense, sharper. The spectators were quieter today, their chatter muted as they filed into the gallery. Word had spread that the prosecution intended to introduce new financial evidence. Karen's expression when she entered the courtroom was still poised, still practiced, but her shoulders sat a little higher. Her gaze flicked more often toward the door. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. Camila had worked through the weekend with Eli and a retired forensic accountant she had once worked with on a corporate embezzlement case. They followed the money trail from the fake vendors to offshore accounts, which looped back into a local PAC connected to one of the city's council members. That council member had, coincidentally, voted in favor of increased HOA enforcement authority just 6 months earlier. The web had stretched far and wide, but Camila had taken careful notes. They weren't just building a case of attempted murder anymore. They were pulling at a whole network of corruption that Karen had been quietly feeding for years. Prentice began the day with the financial testimony. The forensic accountant laid out the paper trail, complete with spreadsheets, payment orders, and documented inconsistencies between the HOA's official minutes and their actual financial activity. Karen's defense objected often, trying to exclude each new piece of evidence on grounds of relevance or authentication. But the judge allowed most of it through. One by one, the jurors' faces turned from politely interested to deeply concerned. The weight of the evidence pressed down on the room. Camila watched Karen's jaw tighten, her lips twitching slightly as her attorney whispered something in her ear. Monroe remained composed, but the cracks had begun to show. During the lunch recess, Camila stood outside in the narrow courtyard, holding a file folder under one arm and staring at the sky. It was bright now. The fog burned away. The air felt cleaner than it had all week. Eli joined her after a few minutes, hands in his pockets. "She's unraveling," he said. "Not fast enough. Jurors are listening now. She tried to kill my daughter. They should have been listening from the beginning. They're human. People need more than fear. They need proof." Camila turned toward him. "And if the proof still isn't enough?" He looked at her, steady and calm. "Then we keep going." That night, Camila received a phone call from an unknown number. She answered it without hesitation. The voice on the other end was male, low, and deliberate. "You don't know what you're doing." Camila didn't respond. "You think she's the head of the snake. She's not. You pull too hard, and you're going to bring the whole house down. That includes your own." Then the line went dead. Camila stood still for a moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. She listened to the silence, to the cold click of the call's end, and felt a strange calm settle over her. She had been threatened before. She had been followed, lied to, intimidated. But never with this much subtlety, never with such restraint. Whoever had made that call wasn't trying to scare her. They were trying to bargain without offering anything. She returned to the living room where Eli was sitting on the couch with a folder open in his lap. He looked up and read her expression instantly. "What happened?" "They warned me. Told me she's not the top. She's a puppet." Camila nodded. "But she's the one who pulled the trigger." Eli closed the folder. "Then we focus on her for now." That night, neither of them went to bed. They worked until dawn, reviewing every statement, cross-examining testimony, rereading depositions. At one point, Camila leaned back in her chair, exhausted, and Eli reached over to massage the back of her neck. The touch was gentle, not suggestive, but it lingered. "Thank you," she murmured. "You don't have to thank me." "I do. You didn't have to come back." "I never left," he said quietly. Their eyes met, and the moment stretched into something soft and dangerous. She leaned forward, slow, unsure if it was the adrenaline or the ache of too many years of silence. His lips met hers with the same hesitation, then with certainty. The kiss was not rushed. It was careful, layered with years of restraint and the weight of grief. When they pulled apart, she didn't apologize. Neither did he. "We should get back to work," she said. "I know." But for once, she didn't feel like she was doing it alone. The next day in court, the prosecution brought forward a surprise witness. One of the HOA board members, Mrs. Leclerc, had contacted Prentice that morning and agreed to testify. She had previously signed off on some of the fake vendor contracts, but claimed she had been pressured to do so under vague threats from Karen. She admitted she never saw actual work being done by those companies, and that when she asked too many questions, her property received citations that never appeared in official records. Under oath, she said Karen held leverage over most of the board and used her position to manipulate both homeowners and council contacts. She had not known about the shooting until it hit the news, and when she asked Karen about it, Karen had dismissed Isla as a troublemaker and said Camila was just another arrogant prosecutor who needed to be reminded who controls the neighborhood. Camila sat still, fists clenched in her lap. She wanted to rise, to confront Karen directly, to see her reaction, but she stayed in place, her jaw tight, her pulse steady. When court adjourned, Karen left the room without her usual calm. She walked quickly, no smile for the cameras. Monroe spoke to reporters outside, giving a clipped statement about character attacks and the unreliability of hearsay. Camila didn't linger. She walked to her car, got inside, and sat for a moment in silence. The pressure was building. Karen's defense was starting to falter, but it wasn't finished. They still had closing arguments ahead, still had time to twist Isla's testimony, to present Karen as a woman driven by panic instead of power. But the momentum had shifted. The public was watching now. So was the mayor's office. And buried in her files, Camila had two names. She hadn't yet revealed names connected to the shell companies and the campaign donations. She wasn't ready to use them. Not yet. She would hold them for the final blow. Because she wasn't just aiming for a conviction. She wanted a collapse. And she was almost there. The courtroom was quiet when Camila entered for the final day of testimony. A different kind of quiet. The hum of anxious whispers had stilled, the shuffle of papers and clearing of throats subdued beneath the weight of what was coming. This wasn't the end of a trial. This was the drawing of a blade. The verdict hadn't been read, but everyone in the room could feel that the story had already changed. It was no longer about a misfired weapon or a questionable self-defense claim. This had become a referendum on power. Karen sat at the defense table in a pale grey suit that might have been chosen for humility, though nothing about her posture matched it. Her chin remained high, her fingers folded tightly on the table before her. She had stopped scanning the room. She had stopped pretending. When the court clerk called the session to order, she barely blinked. Prentice stood and announced that the state had no further witnesses. He rested the case with a simple statement that let the weight of the evidence hang in the air. Monroe rose to respond, her tone professional but sharp. She called no witnesses either. Instead, she asked the court's permission to submit a written character reference from a city council member, citing a long history of civic service. The judge allowed the submission, but did not permit it to be read aloud. Camila saw the flicker of disappointment in Monroe's face and knew she had hoped for a more public display of support. That silence told her everything. Before closing arguments, the judge called for a recess. The jury would return after lunch, and both sides would deliver their final words. That was the last moment to change hearts, to shift doubts, to remind everyone in that room that behind the legal theater was a girl who still could not sleep without jolting awake at every sound. Outside, Camila stepped into the sunlight, the warmth on her skin grounding her. Eli was waiting across the courtyard, holding a paper cup of coffee he didn't drink. He walked toward her with a look that said he knew she didn't need comfort, just presence. "She's not going to testify," he said. "She doesn't have to. She already told her story the only way she knows how." "I'm not talking about Isla. I mean Karen." Camila looked past him toward the street. "Of course not. If she speaks, she risks unraveling what little protection she has left. She's smart enough to know the courtroom isn't her stronghold anymore." "Then where is it?" Camila turned back to him. "Whatever leverage she still has is outside this building. She's already lost the jury. Now she's trying to survive what comes after." They didn't speak again until the recess ended. Inside, Prentice stood before the jury and began his closing statement. His voice was measured but clear. He started by placing the jurors back in Isla's shoes, describing the quiet of a normal afternoon, the knock at the door, the fear of an angry woman outside, the sound of a gunshot splitting the world in two. He reminded them of the bullet trajectory, the lack of physical evidence supporting any threat, and the consistency of Isla's testimony. He mentioned the forged financial records only once, not as a separate crime, but as context, a pattern of deception that pointed to motive, control, dominance. But it wasn't Prentice's words that would stay with them. It was the image he left them with. She was a teenager alone in her home, her body between a locked door and a woman with a gun. That's all this case is. Everything else is noise. Camila watched the jurors. One nodded. Another looked at the floor. A third wiped tears from her eyes. Then Monroe stood, her heels clicking once against the tile. She began softly, speaking of fear. She reminded the jury that Karen had no criminal history, no recorded acts of violence, only a record of community leadership. She described a world where threats had become common, where even safe neighborhoods saw the occasional danger. She described a woman trying to do her duty, caught in a moment of panic. Camila listened carefully, looking for the angle. It came when Monroe said Karen had only seconds to react, that any reasonable person might have done the same. "That's what this is about," she said. "Reason. Not regret, not outcome. You must decide whether it was reasonable for my client to fear for her life. And if it was, she is not guilty." Camila felt the pull of those words. Reason. Justification. These were powerful tools in a courtroom, especially in a country built around the right to defend oneself. But Monroe had made a mistake. She had leaned too hard on fear, too little on facts. After both arguments concluded, the judge gave instructions to the jury and dismissed them to deliberate. Camila walked out of the room, each step deliberate. She sat on a bench down the hallway, where Isla and Eli joined her moments later. The three of them sat together, watching the minutes stretch. Hours passed. Twice a bailiff walked by and glanced toward the deliberation room, then disappeared again. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said under oath. Just after 5, the jury returned. The clerk read the verdict in a voice without emotion, the words hanging in the silence like a bell ringing through still air. "On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, we the jury find the defendant, Karen Whitmore, guilty. On the charge of attempted manslaughter, we the jury find the defendant, Karen Whitmore, guilty." Karen did not flinch. Her attorney's shoulders slumped, but Karen sat with the same fixed expression she had worn every day of the trial. The judge thanked the jury, dismissed them, and scheduled sentencing for the following week. Then she looked directly at Karen. "Bail is revoked pending sentencing. Defendant is remanded into custody." 2 officers approached. One placed cuffs on Karen's wrists. Camila watched as she stood, tall and unbending, and walked from the courtroom without a word. Her shoes echoed off the walls with the same rhythm she had used on Camila's porch. The room exhaled, quietly, not with relief, but with gravity. Outside, the sun was still high, casting long shadows over the courthouse steps. Reporters circled, voices rising, but Camila ignored them all. She walked with Isla and Eli to the edge of the lot, where her car waited. Isla paused, staring back at the building behind them. "She's gone," she said. "For now," Camila replied. "But not for good. There's still the sentencing, still the other names on those ledgers. This isn't over." Isla looked up at her mother, eyes calm. "But it's a start." Camila nodded. It was. It was more than a start. It was the beginning of the end. Karen's sentencing took place on a cloudless morning 2 weeks later. The air outside the courthouse was dry and sharp, the kind of cold that turned every breath visible. Camila stood on the steps, hands deep in the pockets of her coat, watching the sky lighten as the city stirred around her. There were fewer reporters this time. A few still lingered behind their cameras, hoping to catch a final quote or dramatic glance. But the story had already begun to move out of public attention. A scandal from a city council meeting had stolen most of the headlines that week, and attention had drifted as it always did. But Camila didn't need the press. She wasn't here for their stories. She was here for the end of one. Inside, the courtroom felt familiar again. There was something quieter about it now, less charged. The gallery wasn't full, but a few neighbors from Glenwood Oaks sat behind the bar, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. One of the HOA board members, the same woman who had testified against Karen, sat near the back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Karen was already seated when Camila entered. She wore a plain beige jumpsuit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun that made her look older. There was no makeup this time, no carefully chosen colors or coordinated jewelry. She had been in the county jail for 17 days, and it had carved into her. Not deeply, but visibly. Her posture remained upright, but the tightness in her jaw had softened into resignation. She didn't look at Camila when she passed. Isla had chosen not to come. Camila hadn't pushed her. After everything she had been through, she deserved peace, even if it came in the form of staying home, wrapped in a blanket, watching old movies with the sound low. She had started painting again, slowly, her sketches still filled with shadows but now touched by color. Camila had seen a canvas on the easel that morning before she left, a blur of sky and broken glass beneath a tree with roots twisting into the ground like veins. It had stopped her in her tracks. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The sentencing hearing began without delay. Karen's lawyer made one final appeal, asking for leniency based on her client's age, her lack of criminal history, and the circumstances of the shooting. She spoke about Karen's years of civic involvement, her dedication to the community, the way she had lost her way, but not her humanity. Camila listened without flinching. There was no regret in those words, only strategy. Then the judge asked if the victim's representative wished to speak. Prentice nodded to Camila, and she rose. She walked to the center of the room, took her place behind the podium, and looked out at the court. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence settle. She had practiced her statement once, alone in her office, but now she set the paper down unread. "My name is Camila Torres," she said, her voice clear. "I am an officer of the court, a mother, and a citizen of this city. I have spent my career pursuing justice for others. Today I ask only for truth." She paused and met the judge's gaze. "My daughter, Isla, was shot through a closed door by a woman who believed herself immune to consequence. A woman who used her position in a neighborhood association to harass and intimidate, who built a shell of power out of fear, and who finally crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." Camila glanced at Karen, their eyes locked for the first time in weeks. "My daughter did not provoke her. She did not threaten her. She refused to open the door. That was all. And for that refusal, she was punished. That kind of punishment doesn't come from fear. It comes from entitlement." She turned back to the bench. "There is no sentence that will undo what was done, but there is a message that can be sent. That power without responsibility will not be tolerated. That fear cannot be used to excuse harm. That the law belongs to everyone, not just those who think they can rewrite it." She stepped back from the podium and returned to her seat. The judge spoke next, and her words were firm. She acknowledged the severity of the offense, the clarity of the evidence, and the abuse of authority that had surrounded it. Karen had not just committed a violent act, but had done so under the false pretense of public duty. That betrayal of trust carried weight. The sentence came down clear and final. 25 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Karen sat still as the judge spoke. When it was done, she was led from the courtroom in silence. Her eyes never met Camila's again. Outside, the air felt warmer, though the temperature hadn't changed. Camila walked down the courthouse steps and into the waiting street. Eli was parked nearby and stepped out of the truck when he saw her. She crossed to him without speaking, and he opened his arms. She let herself fall into them. "She's gone," he said quietly. Camila nodded against his shoulder. "For now." Later that evening, Camila stood on her back patio, a glass of wine in her hand, and the sky streaked orange and purple above her. Isla sat in a chair nearby, her sketchbook open in her lap, the pages fluttering in the breeze. There was a new steadiness in her posture, not quite healed, but no longer fragile. Eli joined them with a bowl of pasta, setting it on the table between them. No one reached for it yet. They didn't need to fill the silence. It was the good kind now, the kind that didn't feel like a warning. "Do you think they'll come after you?" Isla asked suddenly, her voice soft but curious. Camila looked at her daughter and then at Eli. "Not if they know what's good for them." Eli chuckled once, then fell quiet again. There were still names on her list. Council members, developers, silent partners in the shell companies Karen had funneled funds through. The district attorney's office had opened a separate investigation. Camila wasn't leading it, but she knew she'd be called in eventually. For now, she had stepped back, taken a formal leave of absence. No one had protested. They knew better. The moon rose slowly as the light drained from the sky. Camila felt her shoulders relax, the tension she had carried for months easing slightly. She had done what she came to do. Karen had been convicted. Isla was safe. The mask had been torn away. But something in her still refused to let go completely. There were more battles to fight, not with rage, but with resolve. For now, though, she poured herself another glass of wine, listened to the quiet rhythm of Isla's pencil on the page, and let herself breathe. That was enough for one evening. The ocean always smelled different when you were close enough to feel the salt coat your skin. Camila leaned on the railing of the small balcony overlooking the shore, her fingers curled around a ceramic mug still warm with tea. Waves moved in steady rhythm across the sand, slow and deliberate, each one collapsing into the next as if they couldn't bear to be alone. The air was cool. Below, on the beach, Isla walked barefoot, her sling finally gone, sleeves pushed up to her elbows as she crouched to pick up shells from the edge of the surf. Her hair had grown longer in the past weeks, and the wind kept tugging it across her face. She didn't fight it. She let it fall where it wanted. They had come to the coast at Eli's suggestion. He knew someone who owned a small cottage and wasn't using it this time of year. It was barely 2 hours outside the city, but it might as well have been a world away. There were no headlines here, no courtrooms, no surveillance notices tucked into mailboxes. There was just the sound of the sea, the crackle of firewood, and the weight of healing too slow to name. Camila hadn't planned to stay this long. Originally, they had packed for 3 days. That had turned into a week. Now they had been here nearly a month. And every day, it felt less like an escape and more like a decision. Eli stepped out behind her, carrying his own mug and 2 slices of toast. He offered one to her, which she took without speaking. They stood side by side for a while, looking down at Isla as she moved across the sand, her sketchbook tucked under one arm now, her other hand cupped protectively around whatever she had found. "She doesn't flinch anymore," Eli said. "No," Camila replied. "Not lately. She started drawing again. She never stopped, but now she doesn't hide it." Eli leaned on the railing beside her. "She's stronger than both of us combined." Camila smiled faintly. "She always has been." They watched Isla make her way back toward the house, her footprints stretching behind her in a long, steady line. When she reached the porch, she glanced up at them, gave a quick wave, then disappeared inside. Eli took a sip of tea and set the mug down on the railing. He turned to Camila, the expression in his eyes softer than she'd seen it in years. "You could stay here, you know," he said. "You don't have to go back." Camila didn't answer right away. The wind brushed against her cheeks, and the taste of salt lingered on her lips. She had asked herself that same question every morning. What waited for her back home? A pile of unopened case files, calls from colleagues wanting direction, a new district attorney who had replaced her name on the roster and now sat behind the same desk she once did. The office hadn't pressured her to return. She had made it clear she wasn't ready, and no one had challenged her. She wasn't sure if that was respect or relief. "I don't know what I'd be if I didn't go back," she said finally. "You'd still be you. That hasn't always been enough." Eli touched her hand, and she didn't pull away. His thumb brushed the edge of her knuckle, and something in her steadied. "Maybe now it is," he said. She looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes were deeper than they had been before. His hair was grayer, but his presence had never wavered. Not once since that day he stepped into the hospital and asked what she needed. He had kept his promise. He had stayed. "You think this lasts?" she asked. "What, peace?" She nodded. He exhaled slowly. "I think peace doesn't last forever, but I think we can build something that does." Camila considered that. It didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a truth you reached only after everything else had been torn away. That evening, they cooked dinner together. Isla made the salad, slicing vegetables with a care that seemed almost ceremonial. Eli grilled fish out on the patio. Camila prepared the rice, her fingers moving without thought, as if this simple act carried its own ritual. They ate outside, wrapped in light sweaters, watching the sun sink into the sea. There was no music, only the sound of forks on plates and the hush of waves. Afterward, Isla excused herself, disappearing into the guest room with her sketchbook. Camila lingered at the table while Eli cleared the dishes. When he came back, she stood and walked to the edge of the porch. He followed, as he always did. "I've been thinking," she said. "Dangerous." She smiled without turning. "I don't want to wait anymore." "For what?" "For the next crisis. The next call. The next thing to pull me back into something I don't believe in." He was quiet. She turned to face him. "I want to stay. Not forever, but long enough to learn what life looks like when it isn't built around war." Eli stepped closer. "You don't have to ask me." "I know." She hesitated. Then she reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small folded paper. She opened it, revealing a rough sketch of a new door. It wasn't the old one, the one shattered by gunfire and grief. This door was thick, made of steel, reinforced along the seams, and painted blue, a bright blue, hopeful. "I want to have this built," she said, "for the house. Not because we need it, because I want to look at it and remember that we survived." Eli took the sketch, studied it, and handed it back. "Then let's build it," he said. Later that night, with the fire low and Isla already asleep, Camila sat beside Eli on the small couch inside the cottage. They didn't talk about the trial. They didn't talk about Karen or the list of names still being investigated. They didn't talk about the news. Instead, Camila leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. He put his arm around her, and they sat like that, the soft hum of the sea drifting through the open window. After a while, she spoke. "You still haven't asked." He looked down at her, puzzled. "Asked what?" "What you really came back for." Eli smiled, slow and quiet. "You." She kissed him then, no hesitation. Not the kind of kiss that asked for anything, the kind that gave everything. When they pulled apart, she whispered against his lips, "Then stay." "I already have." Outside, the wind carried the sound of the tide up toward the porch, and inside the house, for the first time in a very long time, Camila Torres let herself sleep deeply and without fear. A few weeks later, when they returned to the city, the first thing she did was hire a contractor. Together, they tore out the damaged frame, reinforced the threshold, and installed a new front door. Steel core, 3-point locking system, seamless trim, painted bright blue. It wasn't just a door, it was a beginning.